morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. As always, I'm joined by Jessica Burbank, and we're going to get straight into the breaking news. Last night, pictures began to emerge on X of what appeared to be Israeli military strikes on the Iranian city of Isfahan. Iran's state news agency IRNA reported a military official in the central Iranian city, Brigadier General Mihan Dost, as saying loud sounds heard east of the city were the sound of air defenses intercepting what he called a, quote, suspicious target, and that no damage was reported in the area. There are also reports of explosions in Iraq and Syria.
The strikes appear to be the response that Israel vowed to carry out after an Iranian attack on Sunday when Tehran fired hundreds of drones and missiles at Israel. Most of Iran's volleys were intercepted or caused little damage. This appears to be the retaliation that Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu was threatening in response to last weekend's attack from Iran. There has also been an uptick in skirmishes on the northern border of Israel between that country and Iranian-backed Hezbollah as well. With us now to discuss all of this is Senior Fellow for National Defense at the Heritage Foundation, former Pentagon official and 25-year Navy veteran and captain, Brent Sadler. Thank you so much for joining us, Brent.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today.
So I want to get right into everyone's biggest concerns. Twitter blew up. That's a bad choice of words, with people saying this is World War II. What would you say to those people to perhaps tamp down or validate those concerns?
Well, Israel and Iran are actually communicating with each other right now with ordnance. It's not necessarily a war. I think they're both testing each other's escalation, appetite, and I think both do not want this to go much further than it has already. The attack that occurred last night by Israel into Isfahan is actually very small and very targeted compared to what the Iranians unleashed last week. But it appears the Israelis were a lot more effective with their very, very much smaller attack. But I don't think we're out of the woods yet. But I don't think a wider war between these two, a declared war between Israel and Iran is likely, because there's just too many other risks for the regime in Tehran that they would rather avoid.
Right. Yeah, so I said World War II. I should have said World War III. I want to say everyone was freaking out that this could be the next World War, not a continuation of World War II. Right. Sorry, Amber, go ahead.
No, fair enough. And Captain Sadler, do you think it's likely that Iran will respond to this? And do you think that Israel should have responded? The President, Joe Biden, suggested that they should hang back, basically because 99% of those Iranian missiles were intercepted with the help of the United States and other allies to Israel. So what do you make of Israel's response? And then is it likely that Iran will then respond in kind?
Well, I mean, first off, the relationship with this White House and the administration of Netanyahu is horrible. Not much trust there, though we both need each other, and Israel relies on the United States for support, a lot of which it gets grudgingly from the current administration. I don't think any advice is really going to be taken. I think the Israelis made the calculation based on their own, and it could prove to be very shrewd because the regime in Tehran is very brittle. There were lots of mass protests. There was a lot of instability, suicide bombings in the lead up to October 7th. There's probably still going on. We're just not hearing about it with all the other activity going on. So the regime is fearful. And I think explains partly their antagonizing their proxies to attack Israel last October and to sustain the fight. But I think this attack doesn't come anywhere close to what the Iranians did. It'll be a real question about what the strategic effect on the Iranian people as to whether there'll need to be follow-up. Because if the regime does continue, and I think it's going to be through their proxies, it trigger another response from Israel, very likely to be against Hezbollah.
Now, how would you square this conflict in terms of how Americans typically like to frame it? We like to say these are the good guys and these are the bad guys. Obviously, most international conflicts are far more complex. Now, you have Palestine with much less military strength than Israel. And so having other countries claim to be coming to the defense of Palestine, are there other interests maybe at play when a big, powerful country like Iran gets involved, other than maybe defending innocent Palestinian people?
No, absolutely. And I think that power play, I think it's more complex than a Sunni Shia religious difference between Iran and, say, Saudi Arabia and much of the rest of the Arab world. There is actually a regional power dynamic that's going on. And this is why you saw Jordan and Saudi Arabia allow the United States and other allied countries with Israel to shoot down many of those missiles and drones that were headed towards Israel. And that's one of the reasons why Iran's attack largely failed last weekend. So I think there's a rallying to a common cause that's standing up to the very nefarious and very destructive tendencies of this Iranian regime. Saudi Arabia has fought an Iranian proxy for years in Yemen. And so there's no good blood between them. And certainly the Palestinians have done themselves no favor by aligning more and more with Iran, specifically Hamas.
Do you think the Biden administration has any responsibility for Iran's ability to further fund its proxies and sort of escalate some of these conflicts in the Middle East?
Well, China definitely benefits win or lose. They've positioned themselves to be on a beneficial side of the equation very carefully, but also very shrewdly. Russia also is benefiting Iran because there's the trade between the two to support Putin's war in Ukraine right now. And of course, it all is funded, and both Iran and Russia are funding their activities with petrodollars or petro yuan, probably more appropriately. Because over about 90% of all of the income that Iran is taking in from its petroleum sales, which have exploded literally in volume in the last few years, most of that goes to China. So China is funding, in a large part, the Iranian regime. And that regime does have a directed economy, does have the ability to direct where those proceeds go. And unfortunately, we know from history that those proceeds they like to put towards their proxies and sowing regional discord because it serves their longer term objectives. And China and Russia are both behind them in that.
A quick follow up, if I may. I think you may have misheard the question, but I was curious about, and it's fine because your answer was still very elucidating, but do you think that the Biden administration has any responsibility? I mean, they released the $6 billion through the hostage exchange, which was supposedly tagged for humanitarian purposes, but we know, of course, money is fungible. How much has the Biden administration's foreign policy perhaps helped to bolster Iran and make them more aggressive in the region?
Well, they're very culpable, quite frankly. I mean, coming into office in January of 2021, despite the successes of the Abraham Accords, they consciously downplayed it. They kept the hands off because they viewed it as a tainted Trump policy, but it's been very successful. And now, 3 years later, they're coming around to supporting it, even though the last minute they tried to change the name of it. They're coming back to what is a successful policy. Unfortunately, by trying to pursue a renewed nuclear agreement, a flawed one at that, from the JCPOA, they've actually given too much to the Iranians without getting anything in return, and in the process alienated the United States from one of our key allies in the region, Saudi Arabia, going so far as to personally embarrass and to attack the Crown Prince, who really is running making many of the decisions in Saudi Arabia. If you recall, the United States president went to Riyadh to try to ask for more oil to be produced at a very testy time after Putin's invasion in Ukraine, and the markets were reeling, and they basically refused. And so we don't have a lot of standing on the current administration with our best friends and allies in the region. And so a course correction is long past due.
Now, Israel did strike the Iranian embassy in Syria, which many people believe, like Hamas's attack on October 7th, could have been an effort to get more proxies involved or more allied countries involved. Was this attack by Israel the same effort to get the United States involved, perhaps? And were the simultaneous strikes on Iran, Syria, and Iraq? We haven't heard a lot of media coverage of the strikes on Syria and Iraq. But is this Israel's attempt to get the U.S. further involved in the regional war?
Well, I think they've been engaged in this proxy war for many years. So this is not new. The IRGC, kind of like the mafia, They are the ones, the muscle that keep the proxies in line. They're the ones that fund them to make sure they stay and maintain power and influence in southern Lebanon or in Lebanon, as well as Yemen and Iraq and Syria. So the IRGC is the connective fiber that connects the Iranian regime in Tehran to its proxies. You sever the IRGC, Iran's influence throughout the region evaporates. And so Israel's been going after the leadership for quite a long time and taking these folks out who have blood on their hands. And in fact, the general that they took out in Damascus on April 1st was planning follow-on attacks and facilitating assaults from Hezbollah. So this was part of a long-running proxy war, and that is the effect they're after. We saw an example of this when President Trump ordered the killing of General Soleimani, who had American blood on his hands and was planning further attacks. So it follows in line with that. It is in national interest and self-defense to go after these individuals, as Israel did. Very targeted, very limited on scope, and no real secondary damage or casualties in the matter and the way they did it. Very different from the approach that the Iranians and their proxies, where they try to maximize casualties, irregardless if they are actually the targeted individuals in the military or hostile government, but also innocent civilians in the process.
Well, we will, of course, continue to follow breaking news from this latest attack. Captain Sadler, thank you so much for joining us this morning on Rising.
Thank you very much for having me.